capsule. And then the two regions inside include the cortex and the medulla. Capsule, cortex, medulla. Then we have the pyramids. These are the pyramids. And in between each of the pyramids are the renal columns. So here's a renal column, here's a renal column. Anywhere between the pyramids are the renal columns. Pyramid, renal column, pyramid. Now, as urine is being formed in the nephron, which I'll show you here and over here, then urine drips out of the renal papilia, which is the bottom tip of the pyramid, here, here, or here, into this little cup. These little cups are called minor calyx. That's what calyx means. And the minor calyxes merge to form the major calyx, and the major calyxes form the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis exits out of the kidney at the hilum to form the ureter. As far as the blood vessels go, looking at the renal artery, it enters into the kidney and becomes a segmental artery, splits, and the segmental artery courses up between the pyramids to form the interlobar, which travels up through the column. As it travels up through the column and courses over the pyramid, it becomes the arcuate artery or vein, and then the arcuate heads up towards, the arcuate gives rise to the interlobular that heads up towards the glomerulus here, and gives rise to the afferent arteriole. So just to be clear, this is the interlobar, this is the interlobular. The difference between them is the arcuate. Interlobar, arcuate, interlobular. Then the interlobular gives rise to the afferent arteriole that's here. So if you follow this again, here we have the interlobar, which is between the pyramids, interlobar. Then we have the arcuate coursing over the pyramid. This is the pyramid, this is the pyramid, and then the arcuate gives rise to the interlobular here. So it's heading up towards the capsule. The interlobular is going to give rise to the afferent arteriole that's going to supply the glomerulus, which is the vascular tuft. That's what this is. So this is the glomerulus. This is Bowman's capsule. The surface of the glomerulus is called the visceral layer, and the inside layer of Bowman's capsule is called the parietal layer. Notice that the afferent arteriole is larger in diameter than the efferent arteriole. That allows for pressure to build inside the glomerulus that favors filtration, the escape of solutes and water into the capsular space and then into the proximal convoluted tubule. Also, we have the distal convoluted tubule portion here that shows the thickened macula densa cells that are monitoring the flow rate through the distal convoluted tubule, and that'll work in concert with the juxtaglomerular cells, which produce renin and erythropoietin. So this is the juxtaglomerular apparatus, the macula densa cells, the juxtaglomerular cells that sit next to the glomerulus, juxtaglomerular next to the glomerulus. Now, let's take a look at the tubules. You have the very short cortical nephron, you have the very, very long juxtamedullary nephron. So let's look at the components of that by using this model. Again, as a reference point, let's take a look at the interlobular artery that's giving rise to the afferent arteriole that is connected to the glomerulus. So these green structures represent Bowman's capsule. All the large diameter capillaries are the afferent arteriole, and all the small blood vessels leaving the glomerulus are the efferent arterioles. Now there's 1 million of these nephrons in each kidney. So there's just a representation showing us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 glomerulus or portions of it. Now, once filtrate is inside Bowman's capsule, it enters into the proximal convoluted tubule, and on this model it's orange. Proximal means closer to the point of origin. So the first place that filtrate now goes is into the proximal convoluted tubule, and it's twisting. And of course that's going to give up its filtrate into the interstitial compartment, which is going to send it into the peritubular capillaries. The efferent arteriole gives rise to the peritubular capillaries, or in this case, gives rise to the vasa recta. These are the vasa recta, these are the peritubular capillaries. From the proximal convoluted tubule, it heads deep down towards the medulla in the descending limb. The descending limb becomes the thin limb, and then we have this hairpin turn, which is called the loop of Henle. We have the thick ascending limb, which leads into the distal convoluted tubule. This was once upon a time purple, it's now white. That's connected to the collecting duct, which is yellow. the papillary duct, which is thicker in diameter, and that drains into the minor calyx here, major calyx, and renal pelvis. So this is the proximal convoluted tubule, descending limb, thin limb, loop of Henle, ascending limb, thick ascending limb, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. I'd like to ask those questions on this because it's larger. Now, once urine travels down the ureter, in this model here, the ureters enter into the into the bladder on the posterior side, and the little slits here are called the ureteral openings. Urine travels into the bladder, and then when the bladder fills, it's going to cause the detrusor muscle to constrict, opening up the valve here. This is the internal sphincter. This is the male. This is the prostate. And then sitting below this, and you'll see this when we take a look at the reproductive models next week, you'll see the urogenital diaphragm muscle, which has another sphincter muscle in it. So this is the trigone. These are the ureteral openings. This is the rugae inside the bladder. This is the detrusor muscle forming the bladder. These are the ureters that drain the kidneys at the hilum of the kidney. This is the abdominal inferior vena cava, renal veins, abdominal aorta, renal arteries. Finally, you have another look at the glomerulus. That's what this is, the vascular tuft. This is the vascular tuft. You have the afferent arteriole, which is larger diameter, afferent arteriole, leads into the glomerulus, and then filtrate is formed and enters into the capsular space. That's the space between the visceral layer and the parietal layer. These are the parietal cells. These are the parietal cells. This is the capsular space. Filtrate now enters the proximal convoluted tubule. Proximal convoluted tubule. Notice that the proximal convoluted tubule has pink cells here. So each of these are proximal convoluted tubule that service many, many other nephrons in the kidney. You also have the distal convoluted tubule, which sits between the afferent and efferent arteriole. Distal convoluted tubule, macula densa cells. Macula densa cells. The juxtaglomerular cells here around the afferent arteriole give rise to or release renin and erythropoietin. So this is similar to this, it's just a different view. Anyone have any questions about the renal models? Okay, so let's take a look at the